In this video, I'll be replacing the near side front brake caliper on this Audi A4. So today's car is this Audi A4. It's a 2006 1.8T B7. It's an S-Line car. It belongs to a good friend of mine who's only recently purchased this. It comes with some good history and it seems a great car. Today on this car, I'm going to be changing this near side front brake caliper. Reason for changing it: at slow speeds, the vehicle kind of comes to a halt by itself. It's got a little bit of judder as well of high speed braking. This wheel is getting hotter than the rest on the car and it's producing a bit more brake dust, so it's very likely we've just got a caliper that's hanging on a bit more than it should. So we're going to be changing that today. It's always a good idea to initially loosen the wheel bolts before the vehicle is on a jack, so you can get more leverage when the wheel's on the ground and it's not going to turn. I had to pre-loosen these off camera as they were murderously tight, and someone has likely done them up with an air gun and not torqued them up correctly. So just before we get underway with the job, just a quick look at the caliper that I'm going to be fitting. Mounting points, we've got two slider bolts that go in here and here, 7mm Allen key slider bolts. The bracket for the brake pipe and hose fix is on here with a 10mm bolt. Just here is a protective cover that we remove, and that's where the hydraulic connection goes on, and it's an 11mm union, 11mm spanner size union. If I just flip this round here, you'll see where those two holes there, that's where the wire spring clip that secures the caliper and holds it in the correct position, that fits on as well, just in there. So firstly we remove this spring clip, which comes off very easily. Now ordinarily we would push this piston in, which would enable us to release this caliper. However, this piston is C-solid, and I have tried this off camera and it doesn't move at all. There is no way we can get that piston back in at all. But fortunately, because this car has recently had pads and discs, the discs are not very lipped, which means it's not going to be an issue. As you can see, these brake discs, very smooth across their surface, no lip here at all. There is some signs of overheating. Brake discs go a peculiar colour when they overheat, and you can actually see traces of it here, but hopefully they're not warped. We'll know if there's been any damage, if the brakes judder when the vehicle's driven after this repair. Tools that we need for this at this point: you've got two fixings here and here. These are caliper to the caliper carrier, and these are held in by 7mm Allen key bolts. Well, they're slider pins, so you need 7mm Allen key on here and here. Next thing, we've got the hydraulic connection here. This is where the brake pipe joins the caliper. This is an 11mm union here. I've found these snap-on specifically designed spanners to be the best. If you notice here, it has a cutout, and this grips the union from many more sides than a conventional spanner, which means you've got way less chance of rounding it off. It's always a good idea to undo this first, because it can require a bit of force. You don't need to undo it fully, just slightly. Just crack that off, because it's far easier to do it while the caliper's still bolted on. So once you've got the caliper off, you can't get leverage on it. Next, we undo the 10mm bolt that holds this bracket here to the brake caliper, as I showed you earlier when I was showing you the new part. It's the only bolt that holds it on, 10mm. It's very difficult to get a good camera angle to show you that, but it is there, I can assure you. There is the bolt. Now the caliper's loose but not completely unbolted. Now's a good time to remove this union, and to be prepared for the fact that it will drip. It's not a problem because we are bleeding the brakes. It does eventually free off, so you can undo it with your hand. That will continue to drip, not an issue. I've placed a jug underneath there, a jug that won't be going back into the kitchen. Now we can fully undo the 2 caliper bolts. Brake fluid is incredibly slippery if you get it on your gloves and on your tools. Makes it really hard to grip things. These are both loosened. There is now nothing holding that caliper on other than the fact that it's just the resistance of it being there. Now lever this caliper off. Had we been able to push the piston in, this would have come out a lot easier, but we are where we are with that. I've just placed the caliper up here on the brake disc just for ease for the moment. We just need to remove this brake pad, and now the caliper is completely free. Now's a good time just to have a look at the old versus new, just to make sure that everything matches up and that everything's okay before we fit the part. It all looks to be the same. The only thing we need to do is to swap over these slider bolts. These are the 7mm Allen key bolts that I just removed. These will go in here. It's worth using a little bit of the grease that you get with the brake caliper, just to make sure they're sliding freely. And then just to remove this little cap here, ready to accept the brake pipe union. Now is also a good time to clean up these surfaces here, the sliding surfaces for the brake pads. I'll do this off camera because it creates an awful lot of dust, but I'll be using a wire brush along with a screwdriver just to scrape and clean these up. And I've just applied some copper slip to these surfaces here just to ensure that the pads slide freely. So the new caliper is ready. It's got its slider pins there fitted. It's ready to go. We just need to fit this brake pad into piston, which is done. This brake pad can be fitted into here, and we can fit the caliper into position. Very loosely do up the mounting bolts. And to prevent further drippage, we can now refit this hydraulic line. Can tighten this up, just not fully at this point, just because we need to ensure that the bracket is correctly positioned and bolted onto the caliper while it still has the ability to be moved. Okay, so this little bolt down here that holds this bracket in place is in. It is terribly difficult to get a good angle to show you, but it is just a 10mm bolt, and it's done up, it's secure, and it's all good. Which means we can now tighten up this hydraulic union fully, and that will stop it from dripping. And we can now tighten fully these 7mm slider bolts. That one's tight. That one's tight. We now refit the spring clip. And just check that it's fitted correctly, and that has the action of pulling the caliper around this way and keeping the pads face on against the disc. So we're now going to start the brake bleeding process. So we fill up this reservoir. This is a fairly readily available pressure bleeding system. What you've actually got here is pressure that's supplied by a spare wheel. This is an old wheel from one of my smart cars. That provides the pressure. It pressurizes this container, which sends the brake fluid into the reservoir. So all you then have to do is undo each bleed screw in turn at each caliper, whichever ones you want to bleed, and allow the brake fluid to be forced through the system. So it's a very easy way to bleed brakes single-handed. You don't need somebody pumping the pedal and shouting up, down, and so on, and them getting awfully bored. It's a good system. So we can now bleed this brake here. This screw is 10mm on this caliper. It would have been 11 on the original. We fit plastic hose over there. We undo the brake screw, and this should allow us to bleed this brake. Quite a bit of fluid was lost, so it will take a little while. It's always good to bleed about up to half a litre through each bleed screw on each wheel. Certainly make sure there are no air bubbles and that you've bled a sufficient amount through, and that it's also nice and clear, and that it's fresh brake fluid that's come through the system. And repeat this at each corner if you're doing a full brake fluid change. Okay, so we've bled the right quantity through the wheel, so we now tighten this bleed screw up. And remove the hose. And finally, we torque up the wheel bolts. Press the brake pedal a few times. Yep, nice firm pedal. And we just check the brake fluid level, which is just fine. And there it is, all done. One near side front brake caliper fitted and bled. All that I need to do now is to road test the car, make sure that it drives and stops okay. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the video. Unfortunately, I didn't get the part until late afternoon, so I did run out of daylight during filming. I had to use some artificial light, so hopefully that hasn't affected the quality of the footage too much. If you've enjoyed the video, please don't forget to like and subscribe, especially if you want to see more content like this. I'll see you again soon. Thank you and goodbye.